I stood outside the apartment door, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The spare key felt heavy in my palm, colder than the night air pressing against my skin. I had no reason to suspect anything. No strange behavior, no late-night disappearances, nothing. But something in my gut had pulled me here, an invisible force whispering that everything I believed in was about to come crashing down. I turned the key, the click of the lock echoing louder than it should have. My breath hitched as I pushed the door open. The place was dark except for the soft glow seeping out from the bedroom. My bedroom, my fiancée's bedroom. My legs carried me forward before my mind could stop them. The moment I stepped into the doorway, time seemed to slow, the world tilting on its axis. There they were, my best friend and my fiancé tangled in each other, lost in the kind of betrayal that burns straight through your soul. My mouth went dry, my stomach twisted into knots so tight I could barely breathe. But the real pain, the kind that breaks something inside you permanently, came when she lifted her head, met my eyes, and smirked. "Oh, hey," she said casually, as if I had just caught her watching TV instead of destroying everything we built together. My best friend didn't even bother covering himself up, just ran a hand through his hair and gave me a half-hearted shrug. I felt like I was outside my own body, watching my life collapse like a house of cards in slow motion. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to break something, anything, but I just stood there, frozen in place, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then she laughed, a cruel, biting sound that cut deeper than a knife. "What are you gonna do? Cry?" she mocked, tilting her head like I was some pathetic little boy who had just lost his favorite toy. The two of them, wrapped up in each other. My heart was still racing, my mind still spinning, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. Missed calls. Dozens of them. From her. From him. Their names flashing across my screen like a cruel reminder of last night. I let the phone ring, watching it without emotion. Whatever they had to say, whatever excuse or lie they were scrambling to come up with, I wasn't interested. But something told me they weren't calling just to apologize. Something had changed, and for the first time since last night, I felt a spark of curiosity. I picked up my phone, took a deep breath, and finally answered. I stared at the phone screen for a moment longer, my thumb hovering over the answer button. My mind raced through all the possible reasons they could be calling me now. Guilt? Regret? Maybe they had finally realized the weight of what they had done. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever this was, it wasn't an apology. I took a deep breath and pressed the button. Before I could say a word, her voice came through, frantic and breathless. "Listen, please, just listen," she pleaded. That smug confidence from last night was gone. Now she sounded desperate, afraid. I could hear the tremble in her voice, something I had never heard before. A part of me wanted to hang up right then and there, to let her drown in whatever mess she had created for herself. But curiosity held me there, waiting. I didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch between us. She let out a shaky breath. Something happened. I don't know what's going on, but she hesitated as if she didn't know how to explain. That's when I heard it, a voice in the background. A male voice. My so-called best friend. He was muttering something, but I couldn't make out the words. His tone, though, was unmistakable. Fear. I frowned. What are you talking about? My voice was calm, too calm. She swallowed hard. It's him. He's not acting normal. He keeps saying weird things, and she stopped suddenly and I heard a loud crash in the background. She let out a small yelp. "Oh my God," she whispered. A cold sensation crept down my spine. This wasn't what I had expected. I had imagined a pathetic excuse, maybe some attempt to explain away their betrayal. But this was something else. Then his voice came through, loud and clear this time. He knew, my former best friend muttered, his voice eerily distant. He knew all along. I froze. She gasped. "What are you talking about?" I could hear her moving, her breath quick and panicked. "I don't know," he mumbled, "but I can feel it." He knew, and he just left. The way he said it sent a chill through me. There was something broken in his voice, something unraveling. My grip tightened around the phone. I finally spoke, my voice steady. "Put him on the phone." There was shuffling, and then a moment later, my former best friend's voice came through directly. You set me up, didn't you?" His words were slow, disoriented, like he was piecing something together in real time. I clenched my jaw. "You think I planned for you to stab me in the back? You didn't react." He sounded almost awestruck, like he couldn't believe it himself. "You saw us. You should have lost it. You should have fought me. But you just smiled." His breathing was uneven now, heavier. "Why?" I exhaled slowly. "Because you weren't worth it." Silence. A long, stretched-out silence. Then suddenly a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. A sound between realization and fear. "Oh God," he whispered. "It's happening." I sat up straighter. "What's happening?" Another crash in the background. She screamed his name. I heard footsteps, fast, panicked. A door slamming. Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse thundering in my ears. Whatever was going on over there, I had no intention of stepping in to fix it. They had made their choices. They had mocked me, humiliated me. But as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, something gnawed at the edges of my mind. That last thing he said. "It's happening." And for the first time since last night, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction. Curiosity. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. The silence in my apartment felt heavier now, pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. My mind kept replaying the last thing he said. "It's happening." His voice had been thick with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, confusion, maybe even regret. And then the sudden chaos, the way she had screamed his name before the call cut off. It didn't make sense. None of it did. I should have ignored it. I should have turned off my phone and gone about my day, letting them deal with whatever mess they had gotten themselves into. But something about the way he spoke, the way she sounded so desperate, wouldn't let me. They had betrayed me in the worst way possible, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening to them now wasn't just karma coming around. It was something more. I opened our old group chat, the one we used to use back when we were inseparable. The chat that hadn't been active since I found them together. I stared at the last message, weeks old now. It was from him, a simple, joking message about grabbing drinks together. I should have seen it then. The cracks. The lies. A new message suddenly popped up, startling me. It was from her. "Please, I need to talk to you. Come over. Please." I felt my jaw tighten. The sheer audacity of it. After everything, she had the nerve to ask me to come to her? 1,000 responses ran through my mind, each one more bitter than the last. But before I could type anything, another message appeared. "He's not okay. He's saying things that don't make sense. He looks different. I don't know what's happening to him." I frowned. Different. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. I started typing, then stopped. What was I supposed to say? That I cared? That I'd come running to help fix something I had no part in breaking? Then another message. "I think he's losing it. I'm scared." A sharp knock at my door made me jump. My stomach twisted. No one ever showed up unannounced. I stood up slowly, every nerve in my body on edge. I moved to the door, hesitating for just a second before unlocking it. I wasn't sure what or who I expected to see, but it wasn't her. She stood there, her hair a mess, her face pale. Her eyes darted past me into the apartment, wide with something that looked an awful lot like panic. She had always been put together, always had that air of control. But now, standing in front of me, she looked shaken, vulnerable. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she exhaled sharply. I didn't know where else to go. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "That's funny. You had plenty of places to go last night." She flinched at that, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I deserve that." Her voice was quieter now, almost too quiet. She lifted her head again, eyes pleading. "But I swear, something is wrong with him." I studied her, searching for any trace of manipulation, any sign that this was just another one of their games. But there was something raw in her expression, something too real to fake. Still, I wasn't ready to let my guard down. And why exactly should I care? She swallowed hard. "Because he keeps saying your name." A strange, cold sensation spread through me. "What?" Her breath hitched. He keeps saying you knew. That you did this. He's not acting like himself. He looks different. And he keeps whispering that it's happening. The words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know why, but in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dread. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. He was saying my name? He thought I had something to do with this? My hands curled into fists, a slow anger rising beneath the confusion. This had to be some twisted attempt to drag me back into their mess. But there was something in her eyes, real fear, not just guilt. I stepped aside without a word, letting her in. She hesitated as if expecting me to slam the door in her face, but then hurried past me. She paced the room, her breathing unsteady, glancing at the windows like she was afraid someone might be watching. I stayed by the door, arms crossed. Start talking. She turned to face me, wrapping her arms around herself. After you left that night, he started acting strange. At first, I thought it was just guilt. He kept asking if you were okay, if you would do something drastic. He was paranoid. Like he expected you to show up and get revenge. She paused, rubbing her hands together. But then it got worse. I stayed quiet, letting her talk. She swallowed. He wouldn't sleep. He kept saying he could hear things, see things that weren't there. He said he felt like something was watching him. She let out a shaky breath. And then last night, he woke up screaming. He said something was in the room with him, that it was coming for him. A cold sensation ran down my spine. I wanted to tell her she was being ridiculous, that it was just his guilty conscience messing with his head. But something about the way she said it, the sheer panic in her voice, made my skin crawl. I exhaled slowly. Where is he now? She hesitated, biting her lip. At his place. But I don't think he's alone. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean? She shook her head. I don't know. He started locking himself in the bedroom, refusing to see anyone. I went over this morning, and when I knocked, he just kept whispering something under his breath, over and over. She looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. Your name. A thick silence settled between us. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but something about this felt off. It was too much, too strange. I grabbed my keys. Let's go. She looked startled. What? Where? To see him, I said, already heading for the door. I need to hear this for myself. She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she pulled her coat tighter around her. Then, without another word, she followed. The drive was quiet. The city lights blurred past us, casting shadows on the windshield. My thoughts raced. I kept telling myself this was just paranoia, that my ex-best friend was cracking under his own guilt. But deep down, something didn't feel right. When we pulled up to his apartment, I felt it immediately. A strange stillness, like the air itself had thickened. His car was parked outside, but the curtains were drawn tight. No lights on. She shifted in her seat, glancing at me nervously. Are you sure about this? I wasn't, but I got out anyway. She hurried after me as I walked up to the door. I knocked once, then again. No answer. I tried the handle. Unlocked. Something about that made my stomach tighten. I pushed the door open. The air inside was thick, stale, like the place had been closed up for weeks. The living room was empty, but the TV was on, its screen flickering with static. And then I heard it. A whisper, low, broken, coming from the bedroom. Repeating my name, that I took a slow step forward, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. The whispering hadn't stopped. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical, like a broken record. My name over and over again. The sound of it sent chills down my spine. She clutched my sleeve, her grip ice cold. Do you hear that? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, my mouth dry. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, just enough to see a sliver of darkness inside. I pushed it open. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, facing away from us. His head hung low, his shoulders trembling. The whispering still came, but his lips weren't moving. It took me a second to realize he wasn't whispering at all. The sound was coming from somewhere else. She gasped, taking a step back. What's wrong with him? I swallowed hard. Hey. My voice came out rougher than I intended. He didn't respond. I took another step inside. The room smelled stale, like he hadn't left in days. His hands were gripping the sheets, his knuckles bone white. He was breathing heavily like he was trying to hold something in. Then, suddenly, he turned his head slightly. Just enough for me to see his profile. His eyes were bloodshot, sunken in like he hadn't slept in days. His lips parted, but the whispering continued, still coming from nowhere. Then he spoke. "It found me." A shiver ran down my spine. "What found you?" He didn't blink. "I don't know. But it knows my name. It knows yours too." A heavy silence filled the room. My ex-fiancée shifted beside me, her breathing quick. "This isn't funny," she muttered. "You need help." He flinched at her voice, like the sound of it hurt. "It doesn't like you," he said. She froze. "What?" "It doesn't like you." He slowly turned his head toward her, and for the first time I saw it fear. Not the kind of fear that came from guilt or regret. This was something deeper, something that had hollowed him out from the inside. She let out a shaky laugh, though there was nothing funny about any of this. "You're losing your mind." His breathing hitched. "It's here." The whispering grew louder. My entire body tensed. And then the lamp on the bedside table crashed to the floor. The sound snapped me into action. I grabbed him by the shoulders, forcing him to look at me. "There's nothing here," I said, trying to steady my voice. "You need to snap out of it." His hands trembled. "You think I don't want to?" His voice cracked. "But it doesn't stop. It doesn't leave." I didn't know what to say. My brain was trying to process everything at once, the whispers, his condition, the way the air in the room felt like it was pressing in on us. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out instinctively. One new message. From an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. "You shouldn't have come back." The whispering stopped. The room fell into dead silence. And then his head snapped up, eyes wide with terror. "It knows you're here." My hands tightened around my phone as I stared at the message. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The air in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. My best friend's eyes darted toward the phone in my hand, his face pale and drenched in sweat. His breathing was uneven, shaky. My ex-fiancée stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to keep something out or maybe in. The whispering was gone, but the silence it left behind felt even heavier. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "Who sent this?" My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. My best friend didn't answer. He just shook his head, his expression filled with something I couldn't quite understand, fear, guilt, or maybe both. His hands trembled as he pressed them against his temples. "It doesn't want you here," he muttered under his breath. "It never did." A chill ran down my spine. "Who?" His body stiffened, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for something unseen. Then slowly, his gaze locked onto my ex-fiancée. "It's because of her." She took a step back, her face twisting in confusion and anger. "Me?" Her voice was sharp, defensive. "I don't have anything to do with this." His breath hitched. "You brought it here." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "Leave now, or you'll never leave at all." My fingers trembled as I gripped the phone. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to get out of that house. But something kept me rooted in place. A need to understand. A need to finish what had started the moment I walked in on the two of them. My best friend let out a choked laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is about the affair?" His voice cracked. "You think this is some kind of karmic revenge?" I stared at him, my blood running cold. We thought it was buried. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hands digging into his hair. "But you can't bury something that doesn't want to stay dead." The floor beneath us creaked. The room felt darker, the air heavier. My pulse raced. "What did you do?" My ex-fiancée looked at me, her eyes wide with something I'd never seen before, pure terror. Her lips parted, but before she could say anything, the lights flickered violently. A deafening crack split the air, and the window shattered, sending shards of glass flying across the room. Then, just for a moment, I saw it. A shadow in the broken reflection of the glass, standing right behind my ex-fiancée. Not human. Not real. But there. She let out a strangled scream and stumbled back. My best friend grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "It's too late," he whispered. We let it in. The whispering returned, louder this time, coming from all directions. I didn't think. I grabbed my ex-fiancée's wrist and yanked her toward the door. My best friend followed, his breath ragged. We ran, the sound of the whispers growing, twisting into something almost like laughter. The walls trembled, the house groaning like it was alive. We reached the front door. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It wouldn't budge. I pulled harder. The whispering was right behind us now, like hot breath on the back of my neck. Then, in the shattered glass at my feet, I saw the reflection of something standing in the doorway behind us. Watching. Waiting. My phone buzzed one last time. You should have never come back. The whispering grew unbearable, wrapping around us like invisible hands tightening with every breath. My ex-fiancée clawed at the door, her fingers slipping against the smooth wood as she sobbed. My best friend stood frozen, his eyes locked on the reflection in the broken glass. His lips moved, but no words came out. I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck, a sensation so unnatural that it sent a violent shiver down my spine. My grip on the door tightened. I had to get us out. I slammed my shoulder against it, my heart hammering in my chest. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The whispering vanished. The air became still. The house, which had moments ago felt alive, now stood in eerie silence. The door creaked open on its own. For a second, none of us moved. My ex-fiancée was the first to react. She bolted through the doorway, her breath coming in gasps as she stumbled onto the front porch. My best friend followed, dragging himself outside like he had just escaped drowning. I hesitated, turning back for one last look inside. The broken glass glistened in the dim light. The shattered reflection still showed something that wasn't there, standing in the empty room, staring back at me. My stomach twisted. I stepped outside and slammed the door shut behind me. We stood in the driveway, gasping for air, our bodies trembling. The house loomed behind us, silent once again, as if nothing had happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaky hands. No new messages. Nothing. It was like whatever had been there had disappeared along with the whispers. My ex-fiancée turned to me, her face streaked with tears. What was that? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I stared at her, at the woman I once thought I would spend my life with, and felt nothing. No anger. No heartbreak. Just exhaustion. I don't know, I admitted. But I think it's over. My best friend let out a choked laugh, rubbing his face with both hands. We should have never, he cut himself off, shaking his head. I should have told you the truth. I looked at him, waiting. His gaze dropped to the ground. It wasn't just an affair, he whispered. It started with that, but we found something in that house. Something we shouldn't have messed with. My ex-fiancée let out a shaky breath. We didn't mean to, she said, her voice raw. We didn't know. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. Some things weren't meant to be explained. The silence between us stretched, heavy with everything that had happened, everything that had been lost. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't check my phone again. I didn't look back at them. I just kept walking, leaving them behind, leaving everything behind. By the time I reached my car, I felt lighter, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. I started the engine and drove away without hesitation. That night, I checked my phone one last time before going to bed. No missed calls, no messages. Just silence. For the first time in a long time, I was okay with that.